You talk about these networks and vibrations. You mentioned this, the physiology of manifesting. I'm curious, is it more important to be thinking a certain intention or certain ideas or beliefs, feeling a certain emotions, or physically in a vibration total body to help you manifest?
Well, certainly if you can bring it all together, I mean, that's the ideal. But I think one is, again, we've talked about limited beliefs.
Yes.
You have to understand what causes you to limit your belief, and in some ways it comes down to self-compassion. When you're kind to yourself, then that changes your own physiology. It shifts you from the fear network
and critical network into compassion, right?
Yes, exactly. And so I think that's an important aspect. And again, as an example, I talk about these different networks. There's the default mode network, there's the salience network, the attention network, and the executive control network. Now, the reason I mention these is the executive control network actually gets things done, if you want to put it that way. But if you're driven by fear and anxiety and insecurity, then that limits its ability to do so because you don't have full access, because that's where you have productivity and creativity.
Full access to what?
Your entire, your memories and past experiences. This is what the executive control network contains, and it's shut down when you're fearful or anxious. And so that's one aspect. And then, you know, the other aspect, we talk about embedding your intentions. You know, you have to make that thing you want salient.
What does that mean?
It means it has to be something that touches you, that you really feel like it's there with you and you want it. And the reason I bring that up is because salience it activates, if you want to call it, a bloodhound within your head, where it looks around for opportunities for you to manifest. I'll give you an example.
Talk about bloodhound, or you're talking about something else?
It's search for things, right?
Gotcha,
It gets a scent, right? You know, that's what they do for rescue missions, right?
Yes, yes.
Exactly. So what I mean by that is that if you're able to embed your intention, that activates the salience network, which is the bloodhound. And the analogy is as follows. I'm sure you have been to parties, and they're loud, and your name will be mentioned, and you'll immediately turn, even though it's loud.
Yeah, you're like, where is this?
Yeah, but that's because your identity is deeply embedded within you, right?
Interesting, yes.
So when you do this in terms of an intention, and I'll give a recent example. I'm working on a new project, and I was at a coffee shop, and again, loud, everybody talking, but I heard somebody specifically talk about the project type of the thing I'm doing. So I got up and introduced myself. We connected. And that's how it works, because it creates these synchronicities, because it's always turned on, listening for opportunities, how it can make your intention happen. And another example is, as a neurosurgeon, you know, I would see patients, as an example, let's say somebody with hydrocephalus, right? And most people don't know about that. And they'd go, oh my God, I've never heard of that before. Is that rare? Well, it's not that rare, and obviously if you're seeing a neurosurgeon, it's not rare to us, but what will happen is I'll see them in a few months, and they'll come back and they, the most amazing thing happened. I've run into 5 people with the exact same thing, right?
Right.
Because they have embedded that.
Interesting.
And so they're attuned to it, and suddenly it's like it's everywhere suddenly.
Yeah, you talk about synchronicities in the book. How important is finding and looking for synchronicities when it comes to manifesting?
Well, I think if you do it correctly, they naturally occur over and over again. And you may think they're shocking and how did that happen? But that's because you have made your intention salient. It has grasped your attention network, and it is solely focused on having that happen. And once that process occurs, then you engage your executive control network to actually then respond to it.
Interesting. So you set your intention for what you want to create or desire, and then your attention starts to focus on that in the world, in your environment, and you start to see where the synchronicities line up. And then you mentioned this thing called the filing clerk, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. And that relates in some ways. First of all, one of the process which we talked about, having the ability on a conscious level to embed your intention, that is to, we call it value tag, right? Which makes it important.
Rather than intention.
Yes, yes. And so once you value tag that, that becomes important in your subconscious, and then the networks start working together
to look for it.
Yes. Now, what I will emphasize, and I don't want to, completely poo-poo every article that's been written about manifesting. I mentioned the issues I have with The Secret or these self-serving narratives, but the reality is we know that what wires together, fires together.
Yes.
And my point about that is, number one, you have to work. This isn't like, oh, I thought of it, therefore it should happen. It's like anything, and we talked about it earlier. Everybody's manifesting every day. They just do it very inefficiently, right? So when you do it efficiently, all of these things, come together to have it happen. This is why, as an example, what this woman in the magic shop did, and this was before, these ideas sort of were out there, she made me write my list of things I wanted to manifest down. Because again, when you use every sensory organ, then again, you're engaging all of these different things that go into your subconscious. So you write it down, you read it silently, you read it aloud, you look at it, you visualize, and this is what athletes do. They visualize how it's going to play out. They see themselves in that role. And the more and more you do that, the stronger that wiring gets in your brain, and therefore that increases the chance of it happening.
Interesting. So she taught you this, you wrote it down, and you started doing these processes.
Oh, I would really do this like tens of, maybe hundreds of times a day.
Wow.
Over and over and over again.
But it took you a while until you were able, from 12 until you were able to get, $1 million in the bank, and the mansion, the Ferrari. It didn't happen in 4 years, I'm assuming. It probably took 15 or 20 years.
Well, sure, but there was a whole process, right?
Yes.
Because, first of all, I had decided to be a doctor in 4th grade.
Right.
And this was based on a professions day where a doctor came to our class, and I was so impressed by this person that second I decided to be a doctor, because he was kind, he was thoughtful, he answered my question, he appeared interested in what I had to say. And so saying, if you're poor and you don't have resources, saying I'm going to be a doctor is easier said than done.
Sure.
And in fact, I did have challenges, but I'll tell you a couple stories, though, that tells you how the system works, even though you haven't done all the typical things to make it work.
Okay.
And so I'll tell you how I got into medical school and how I got into college. I was so clueless about college, even though I said I was going to go to college. I was in a science class, and there was a girl sitting next to me, and she was filling out her college application. I had no clue about that.
That you had to apply or...
Yeah, I was sort of waiting till it was supposed to happen.
Sure.
So I looked at this girl, and I asked her what she was doing. She said, well, I'm applying to college, and this is the application. I said, really? And she looked at me and said, yeah. And I said, well, where are you applying to? And she said, UC Irvine. And she looked at me and she said, where are you applied? I said, UC Irvine.
Yeah. That was the process.
Said, I haven't got my application yet. She said, I have an extra one.
Wow. There you go. And that...
Yeah, and I filled that out, and I got in. But
isn't that interesting before you go on there, because you were given the opportunity that you saw that was in front of you. You didn't think beyond other schools. You saw something, you didn't know another process. Said, yeah, I'm going to go there as well. And she said, here's the application. You filled it out, you got in, and you went there. Right?
Yeah, no, and that's my point is, it was in there. I didn't know how it was going to play out.
Yes.
But it played out, and it certainly wasn't the typical way
process.
It would play out.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what happened is, I had a lot of struggles. I had to leave college multiple times, as an example, to get my father out of jail.
Wow.
Or to deal with my mother who attempted suicide, which are not pleasant things
no,
to
not
have to
enjoyable.
go through. And so when I applied to medical school, the average GPA to get into medical school was 3.79 at that time, which is, out of 4, that's like an A minus, right?
Yeah, sure.
My GPA then was 2.53.
Wow.
And I was not
You and me both.
Yeah,
Let's go.
yeah. And I was not going to graduate from college.
Right.
And so I went to the pre-med, and of course, as you know, when you have all these quote-unquote friends, and you say, I want to be a doctor, and many of my friends were pre-med, and they were the type of pre-meds who had 3.7.
Sure, sure.
And it was very hurtful because they said, you're never going to be a doctor. That GPA, what a joke, right? Which, this is your dream, right?
It's painful.
So anyway, we used to have to, or you used to have an interview with the pre-med committee. So you had to go get an appointment, and then they would write a letter of recommendation for you. So I went to the office. I asked the secretary, I said, I want to make an appointment for my pre-med letter.
Yes.
She looked at me, she said, I'm not going to give you an appointment. I said, well, why? She had pulled out my file. She said, because it's a waste of everyone's time.
Oh, man.
Now, can you imagine a human being telling you that you're a waste of their time? I mean, how hurtful.
Very.
But I looked at the woman, and I said, I appreciate what you're saying, but I said, I am not leaving here until you give me that appointment.
Wow.
I said, if you want to call security, that's fine, but I am not leaving. So she did. But imagine, so it comes time for my appointment. Now, do you remember these photos we've seen of Putin sitting at one end of a table? He's by himself. And
yes,
right?
yes.
So I go into this room, and I'm at one end of this long table, and I'm, 20 years old maybe? And then there are these 3 people at the other end of the table. And the guy in the middle, he has my file. And he looks at me, he takes the file, lifts it up, throws it on the table, and he says, say what you have to say so we can get this over with.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
And you sit there, and, how intimidating. And what a jerk, right? So what happened is I looked at the guy, and I said, I am not going to let you turn me into a grade point average. I'm a human being.
Wow.
So I proceeded to lecture them for about 20 minutes.
Oh, my goodness.
They were all crying at the end. Right? Because once you show your humanity, they can't turn away from you. They can't objectify you if you're right there in front of them and force them to look at you.
Wow.
And so what happened is they ended up actually giving me the highest letter of recommendation.
Wow.
And as I was leaving, that secretary actually was in the room. She said, listen, I want you to take this. And it was a trifold brochure for a summer enrichment program at Tulane University in New Orleans for socioeconomically disadvantaged students and minority students. And she looked at me and she said, I have to tell you something, though. The deadline has passed, but I don't think that will impact you.
Wow, right.
So I called the lady, and she let me into the program. And I applied to one medical school and got into one medical school.
Wow.
And I didn't have a degree.
Wow.
Now, to show you, though, the importance of this is that after Hurricane Katrina, the dean of the medical school went into depression and resigned, okay? And so they were looking for a new dean.
At Tulane.
At Tulane.
Yeah.
And they had a guy from Harvard, but he wanted an endowed chair. And I don't know if you're familiar with an endowed chair. No. So an endowed chair is a private donor, donates a lot of money, and it is a chair named after that person. It's one of the highest honors in academic medicine,
okay,
or in the university. And that money is made into an endowment. So then the professor then gets to use it for whatever they want. So it's a very prestigious thing. So I actually ended up endowing the dean's chair. Fast forward many years.
Sure,
right?
Sure. Wow.
Yeah, which was several $1 million.
Interesting.
So still at Tulane, the dean of the medical school is the Doty professor.
Wow.
I rebuilt the library after Hurricane Katrina. And so the point of the story is no one has the ability to tell you what you can and cannot do. And in theory, by every, quote, criteria, I should never have gotten into medical school, right? Yet, I'm one of the largest donors to the medical school, And in fact, they're actually building a Doty Center for Compassion and Medicine at Tulane.
That's cool.
Yeah. So when we think that things are impossible, when we think that it can't happen, or I don't have the criteria that is usually, don't ever believe anything anyone tells you. If I believed what so many people told me was not possible for me to do, I would never have accomplished anything.